is Jeff Mycock. Jeff is the Chief Forester of West Fraser's BC operation, and he's been there since at that position since 2016. Jeff started his career as a field forester, working across a variety of disciplines, including silviculture, operations, forest planning, and in the central Cariboo and Cranbrook regions, some of it working with forestry consulting firms. His career at West Fraser started in 2001, and in 2015 he moved to a corporate forest role in West Fraser Quesnel office. Since then, he spent much of his time on First Nations and other resource stakeholders and the big issues related to forest planning for West Fraser. Jeff's long and diverse background gives him a broad perspective on policy and practice, and we're delighted he can be here to share with us his presentation entitled Decades of Timber Supply Hindsight. If we knew what we know now, if we knew then what we know now. And I'm going to get Jeff to share screen if you have a presentation. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just want to check. I just shared my screen there. Vic, is that coming up properly there?
You might maximize your screen. Turn your lower PowerPoint to full PowerPoint mode.
Yeah. My challenge here is that I'm working on multiple screens and it just went to my other screen. So well, I'm just going to try sharing the other screen here. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Thanks, folks. I've got a full deck here, so I better get going. As Vic mentioned, wanted me to talk about looking back, really as far as we can see back, and look at, let's say over the last 4 decades in BC. What could we have done differently when we look back? And hindsights are 20/20. So we came up with a few things here without too much trouble. And so I've just gone to the next slide, but it's not. See here, a few technical challenges. Let me try it. There we go. Okay, so you should see the next slide there now. So there's 6 primary points that come to mind, when asked this question. I've listed them pretty much in order of what I think are the most substantial. So, dynamic forest management as a whole, are managing the whole forest, connecting forestry to society, effective tenure policy to incent investment, effective timber pricing models, enduring resource reinvestment models, such as FRIA, for example, in Alberta. We don't have a model like that in BC, unfortunately. And then there's some further discussion there around professional reliance. Lots of ideas. There's way more to talk about than what I have time for this morning. So I'm going to focus on one, and to me, that's just the big one. It's dynamic management of the whole forest. So just a bit before that, I just want to frame BC for you. We've got a 95 million hectare public land base, the majority of the province. 55 million hectares of that is forested land base. Out of that forested land base, 22 million is available for timber harvesting. But it's important to note that within that 22 million, there's conservation commitments, and that comprises about 8.14 million hectares today. About 37% roughly of that land base is under some form of conservation at any given point in time. So, our timber harvesting land base over the decades in BC has been shrinking progressively. We've had increases in protected areas, protected lands, resource exclusion areas, spatially managed areas for other values. Today, roughly 52% of the land base is not available for timber harvesting due to things like caribou, moose, fishery-sensitive watersheds, biodiversity requirements. We've got now a federal protected area strategy to contend with. Maybe Indigenous protected conservation areas will be part of that, and on we go. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, about 37% of the timber harvesting land base is constrained in some way. So important to note that, over time, our forests have been changing as well. If we look back, this is a picture from Williams Lake, looking down the lake, basically looking to the east from the town of Williams Lake. And we can see that over the last 80 to 100 years, the forests and the landscape have changed quite considerably. We've got a lot more trees on the land base today than we had in the past. On top of that, we've got a land use plan system in BC that has set aside areas for specific values. It's an evolution of static designations where we've set aside areas for things like old growth management, critical habitat for fish, lakes, community areas of special concern, trails, etc., etc. And we further constrained these areas and said, there's no timber harvesting permitted here, except where essential for things like insect control to curtail severe damage to forest values at a landscape level in a beetle management unit. Generally, by the time that happens, it's too late. We have a beetle population that's no longer controllable. So I just want to walk you through some slides. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly here, but just to illustrate an example for you of what our land use planning paradigm has done. And just, these are static designations that are now enshrined in legal orders. So they're very immovable barriers on the land base today. So starting with old growth management areas. So that's Williams Lake that you can see. This is in around Williams Lake. That's the Fraser River running through north-south there. So we add in scenic areas. We've got preservation, retention, partial retention. We add in ungulate winter ranges. So this is mule deer winter range around Williams Lake. This is enshrined again in regulation, very specific wildlife management requirements that are all legal. We add it all up, and we've got a very complex land base that's very difficult to maneuver through. Lots of overlapping constraints, and not a lot of opportunity to adapt to things like climate change. Practicing forestry in this framework is very complex. So, let's take this static land use paradigm that we're locked into today, and let's look at forest health. So again, look at Williams Lake, and we've got a big problem with Douglas fir bark beetle. All the red dots are survey points with red attack that showed up in July of 2017 aerial overview surveys. Doesn't look very good. Let's go down to the stand level. Look at what these forests look like today. We've got very, very overdense stands. Fire's been held out of these ecosystems for, upwards of 100 years. They're very unhealthy. We've got snow press, blowdown occurring in Douglas fir forests. So, you know, what comes next? Fire. What you see on the right side of the screen there are major fires that occurred in 2017. And there's a strong correlation with where these fires occurred and our nice land use plan designations. These fires burned very intensively. They basically burned everything. There's nothing left. We're starting from scratch. I just want to go walk through some of the other forest health epidemics in the province that we've experienced in my career and that we're experiencing today. And just think about this static land use paradigm and how it's affected these outcomes or contributed to them. So, you know, we're over 15 years since death now in most areas of the province, approaching 20 years in some areas. Harvest of mountain pine beetle is now becoming something that's in past tense. We're basically done. The economic opportunity has gone by. In total, about 18 million hectares were impacted. 55% of the merchantable pine was killed. More than 700 million cubic meters of timber supply impacted. So, you know, the latest one for us is spruce bark beetle in the Omanika, north central part of the province. Largest spruce bark beetle attack in our history. It's just over 500,000 hectares impacted today. It doesn't all look like what I've shown on the screen there. That's the worst case scenario, but it is significant. And we figured there's over 30 million cubic meters of impacted timber supply. There's a lot of debate on shelf life, but long story short, we believe that there's, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of lost revenue and non-recoverable losses in this epidemic now. Back to Douglas fir bark beetle, just to quantify it again, that's a pretty typical stand looking at Douglas fir in BC today, particularly in the Caribou area, Caribou region. And, you know, we're looking at roughly 70,000 hectares impacted right now. So wildfire, you know, we get these conditions, unhealthy conditions. We get forest health outbreaks, bark beetle outbreaks, and then along comes fire. I would argue that fire is a prominent disturbance agent in our interior forests. And we've set ourselves up for major catastrophic landscape level disturbances. So let's revisit values. Let's, you know, that's a typical stand today in the IDF inside the 2017 fire area. Like I said, completely burned. This is not typically what would happen when fire comes to this ecosystem. If the ecosystem was in a better state and a more natural state, fire could occur and you would still have live trees. So what about timber values, visual quality, mule deer winter range, water, fish, old growth? They're all in an undesirable state on that same land base. Let's look at area burned. So, you know, over a 10-year period, 7% of the crown forest in BC, remember it's 55 million hectares, so 4 million hectares burned. If this were to continue at this rate over a 100-year period, let's say over a rotation, 70% of the crown forest would burn. There's a lot of indications through climate change predictions and models that are telling us the rate of fires will increase. Just stop and think about that for a minute. So what does all this mean? So bringing it back to timber supply. That's what our timber supply picture looks like in BC. The green line in the center is basically the interior timber supply. You look at 2020, and this is where we're at right here. We're approaching 40 million. in 2019, our harvest level was 44 million, and we're dropping. I would say that, I would argue that we're going to be maybe a little worse than what the province has predicted in this graph in 2017. So what have we learned? Our forests are not climate adapted. We have multiple values in decline. Static approach is not working. We have an epidemic of unhealthy forest at risk of increased catastrophic disturbance. What can we do about it? The one thing we can manage is fuel. Concern is vulnerability to catastrophic disturbance. We have too many trees. We have too many old trees. We have too many dead trees, too many suppressed trees, too much fuel loading, and a lack of stand and landscape level diversity. Forests and ecosystems are in poor health, poor condition. We have very high fire hazards, and when we have fires, we have extremely volatile fire behavior. We have multiple values at risk. What has to change? We need to shift the paradigm from static, value-centric silos to a holistic, adaptive, sustainable forest management paradigm. Values will then flow congruent with system capacity within sustainable forest management conditions. Ultimately, we want climate-adapted forests that are more resilient to disturbance. We need to address forest vulnerabilities, low resilience, use innovative forest management to change the course. We've got a lot of things that we can do. If we can manage the whole forest and not just the THLB, we can enhance or maintain other values long term. We need to find a way to shift from static to dynamic systems of management. This is not easy. It's very complex, and we need help. Visioning for resiliency. So, what are we doing? What can we be doing? I see I'm quickly running out of time here, so I've got about 3 minutes left. I'll just focus quickly on this slide, and basically we can follow up on this stuff at the breakout table later. But moving to more landscape level planning systems, today that's a gap in BC. Landscape level planning is something that we are not effectively doing. Local forums on resource management, getting to cross-sectoral multidiscipline frameworks principled on sustainability. Right now we have professionals and agencies and sectors working in silos, and we need innovative, financially sustainable treatment regimes. We're not there yet. And we need to prioritize our actions based on vulnerability and risk of loss. And we need to facilitate training and capacity for professionals, contractors, and operators. It's just an example of some of the treatments that are being done. We're just basically scratching the surface at this point, and we're spending a lot of money, and we're not getting very many hectares treated. So we need to really look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. This is, a photo from Paul Hesberg, who we've done some work with, and maybe that's what the future looks like. Is that what climate adapted, resilient, sustainable forest looks like? More diverse landscape forest conditions, more open forest, more young forest, more deciduous forest? I'm not sure, but directionally, I think that's what we need to think about. So I'll conclude there with a picture of Williams Lake, and think of this town that got hit with fires in 2010, 2017, and that's what it looks like today post-fire. Is it going to happen again? I think it's a question of when. There's still a lot of fuel there, so we're not out of it yet. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you, folks. Look forward to the breakout sessions.